The wine glass shattered against the marble floor, red liquid spreading like blood across the pristine white tiles of the Thorne family dining room. My mother, Victoria's face had gone sheet white, her perfectly manicured hand trembling as she pointed an accusing finger at my grandfather. But it was his words spoken just seconds before that had detonated like a bomb in the middle of our Thanksgiving dinner. "I'm glad you used the college fund I set up for you wisely, Anya." A college fund? I had no idea what he was talking about. I had spent the last 3 years working double shifts at a dingy coffee shop, sleeping 4 hours a night, wearing thrift store clothes with holes in them all because I thought I had to pay my own way through community college. And now, sitting at this table laden with hundreds of dollars worth of food I hadn't been allowed to touch yet, my grandfather was telling me about money that should have been mine all along. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't the broken, obedient daughter anymore, and I was about to make them pay for every single lie. If this hits close to home, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe. I want to hear your story too, so drop a comment below. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The story of how I became the family scapegoat started long before that explosive Thanksgiving dinner. It started the day my mother Victoria married into the Thorne family 25 years ago. She was beautiful, ambitious, and hungry for the kind of life that old money could provide. My father, Marcus, was the perfect target, weak-willed, desperate for approval, and completely under his mother's thumb until Victoria sank her claws into him. I came along a year later. An unexpected pregnancy that Victoria never let me forget had derailed her plans to establish herself in high society first. Growing up in the shadow of the Thorne estate was like living in two different worlds. There was the world inside those iron gates with its manicured lawns, crystal chandeliers, and rooms I wasn't allowed to enter. And then there was my world, a cramped apartment on the wrong side of town where the heat barely worked in winter and the neighbors fought loud enough to shake the walls. My parents had their own place separate from the main estate, but even that was a modest house compared to the mansion where my grandparents lived. Still, it was nicer than where we ended up after my mother's spending habits spiraled out of control. I was 7 years old when I first understood that I was different from my brother Dylan. It was Christmas morning and we had been summoned to the estate for the annual gift exchange. Dylan, who was 2 years older, received a brand new bicycle, the expensive kind with all the gears and accessories. I watched his face light up as my father helped him wheel it into the foyer. When my turn came, I unwrapped a box of generic colored pencils and a coloring book from the dollar store. My mother didn't even try to hide her disinterest scrolling through her phone while I mumbled a thank you that no one heard. My grandfather Elias had noticed, though. I caught him watching me with those sharp gray eyes, a frown creasing his weathered face. After that, there were other signs. Dylan got enrolled in private school while I attended the underfunded public school where fights broke out weekly and half the teachers had given up trying. Dylan got new clothes for every season while I wore hand-me-downs from cousins I barely knew. Dylan got guitar lessons, soccer camp, and trips to Disney World. I got library cards and told to be grateful for what I had. My mother's excuse was always the same. Dylan needs these opportunities. He's going to carry on the family legacy. You just need to focus on being humble and helpful. Helpful. That became my role. By the time I was 12, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week because my mother was too busy with her book club and charity luncheons to bother. I was doing laundry, cleaning bathrooms, and essentially raising myself while my parents focused all their attention on grooming Dylan for success. My father, Marcus, would occasionally show a flicker of guilt, slipping me $20 here and there, but he never stood up to Victoria. He never told her to stop treating me like hired help instead of their daughter. High school was when things got really bad. I had to get a work permit at 15 because my parents told me if I wanted anything beyond basic necessities, I needed to earn it myself. So I started working at Rosie's coffee shop, a rundown place that smelled like burnt beans and old grease. I worked there after school on weekends, any shift I could get. Meanwhile, Dylan was being driven to tennis tournaments and SAT prep classes in the Mercedes my mother had somehow convinced my father we needed. I never complained. I actually believed somewhere in my naive teenage heart that if I just worked hard enough, if I was good enough, eventually my parents would see my worth. I made the honor roll every semester. I volunteered at the local food bank. I saved every penny I earned. I thought that would be enough. I thought they would be proud. My grandparents were different. Grandfather Elias was stern and intimidating, a former judge who carried himself with the kind of authority that made people straighten their spines when he entered a room. But with me, there was always a softness in his eyes that I didn't see when he looked at others. Grandmother Eleanor was gentle and kind, always asking about my studies, always seeming genuinely interested in my life. But she was also fragile, diminished by years of deferring to my grandfather's decisions. She never challenged Victoria's treatment of me, though I sometimes caught her watching me with sad, apologetic eyes. The real turning point came during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to the state university. Nothing fancy, but it was affordable and had a decent program in social work. I wanted to help people to make sure no kid felt as invisible as I had. But there was one problem. Even with the small scholarship I had earned and my savings, I was still short. I needed about $15,000 to cover the first year between tuition, housing, and books. I finally worked up the courage to ask my parents for help. It was a Saturday morning, and I found them in the living room of our cramped house. My mother was on her iPad looking at vacation rentals in the Bahamas. My father was half-heartedly watching a football game. I had rehearsed my speech a dozen times, keeping my voice steady as I explained my financial situation and asked if they could help with even a portion of the costs. Victoria didn't even look up from her screen. "Anya, we've told you before, we simply don't have the money. Maybe you should have applied yourself more to get a full scholarship. Or perhaps you should just go to community college for a few years and work. Dylan's private school tuition is expensive, and we have to prioritize." I felt something crack inside my chest. Dylan's school cost $40,000 a year. I was asking for $15,000 once to change my entire life trajectory, but I didn't argue. I never argued. I just nodded, thanked them for considering it, and left the room with tears burning behind my eyes. That summer, I worked 70-hour weeks. I picked up a second job cleaning houses. I sold everything I owned that had any value. By August, I had scraped together enough for community college and a shared bedroom in an apartment with 3 other girls. The bedroom was barely bigger than a closet, and I could hear everything through the paper-thin walls, but it was mine. I had earned it. Community college was harder than I expected, not academically, but practically. I was exhausted all the time, running from classes to work to more classes. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee. I wore the same 5 outfits in rotation until they were threadbare. I watched my classmates complain about their parents not giving them enough allowance money, and I wanted to scream. But I kept going. I had to believe it would be worth it. During those 3 years, I barely saw my family. I was invited to major holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, but the invitations always came at the last minute, as if I was an afterthought. When I did attend, I felt like a ghost at my own family gatherings. My mother would introduce me to her friends with a tight smile and then immediately change the subject. My father avoided eye contact. Dylan, who had gone off to an expensive private university on the family dime, would show up in designer clothes and talk endlessly about his fraternity and his internship at a prestigious law firm that my grandfather had arranged for him. The worst part was watching my mother. She had fully embraced her role as a society matriarch, attending galas, hosting parties, and spending money like water. She drove a new BMW. She wore jewelry that cost more than my annual income. She had weekly spa appointments and a personal trainer, and every time I saw her, she found a way to criticize my appearance. "Anya, you look so tired. Are you eating enough? That outfit is rather shabby. Don't you think? You should really do something with your hair." I started dreading those family gatherings, but I went because some part of me still hoped, still believed that maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. Then came Thanksgiving of my junior year at community college. I almost didn't go. I had been working a double shift the night before and was so exhausted I could barely see straight. My uniform smelled like coffee and my hands were raw from washing dishes. But that morning I received a text from my mother. It wasn't warm or inviting. It just said, "Don't forget Thanksgiving at the estate, on time. No, how are you, or we miss you." Just a command. I should have ignored it, but I didn't. I borrowed a dress from my roommate, something simple and black that was a size too big, but at least looked presentable. I took 2 buses and walked the final mile to the estate because I couldn't afford the rideshare fare. By the time I arrived at those imposing iron gates, my feet were blistering in the only pair of dress shoes I owned. The security guard at the gate didn't recognize me. He actually made me show ID and called up to the main house to verify I was expected. I stood there in the cold November air, feeling like an intruder at my own family's home. When I finally got clearance, I walked up the long driveway past the fountain and the perfectly trimmed hedges toward the mansion that glowed with warm light from every window. Inside the house smelled like roasted turkey and expensive wine. There were flowers everywhere, elaborate arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I could hear laughter coming from the dining room, the clink of crystal glasses, the murmur of conversation. I paused in the foyer, suddenly acutely aware of how out of place I was. My borrowed dress, my scuffed shoes, my hair that I had tried to style but had given up on halfway through. "Anya!" My grandmother Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you made it. Come, everyone's gathering in the dining room." She took my hand and led me through the house. Her hand was soft and warm, and for a moment I felt like maybe I did belong here after all. But that feeling evaporated the second we entered the dining room and my mother's eyes landed on me. Victoria's smile was thin and brittle. "Anya, you're here." She looked me up and down, and I saw the judgment in her eyes. "That dress is rather loose on you. You should eat more. You look positively gaunt." My father mumbled a greeting from his seat at the table, not quite meeting my eyes. Dylan was on his phone, didn't even acknowledge my arrival. But my grandfather Elias stood up, his tall frame commanding attention even at 75 years old. "Anya." His voice was firm but kind. "Come sit. You look tired. Have you been working a lot?" It was the first time anyone had asked about my life in months. I felt tears prick at my eyes and quickly blinked them away. "Yes, grandfather, just trying to stay on top of things." The table was set with china that probably cost more than my car, which I didn't even have. There were multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. I sat in the seat my grandmother indicated at the far end of the table, as far from my parents as possible. Dylan's girlfriend was there, a blonde girl who kept giggling at everything he said. My cousin Leo, who was only 8 years old, sat across from me swinging his legs and playing with his phone under the table until his mother told him to put it away. The meal began with uncomfortable small talk. My mother dominated the conversation, talking about her latest charity project and dropping names of wealthy friends. My father nodded along, occasionally adding a comment. Dylan talked about his internship, how he was learning so much, how the senior partners at the firm had praised his work. I noticed my grandfather watching him with a calculating expression, as if he was trying to determine whether Dylan's accomplishments were genuine or exaggerated. I stayed quiet, focusing on my food, which was delicious, but turned to ash in my mouth. I didn't belong here. I had never belonged here. I was about to excuse myself, early claim I had an exam to study for, when my grandfather cleared his throat. "Before we continue," Elias said, his voice cutting through the chatter. He raised his wine glass. "I want to make a toast to Anya." Everyone fell silent. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My father's face went pale. Dylan finally looked up from his plate. My grandfather's eyes were fixed on me, warm and proud. "Anya, I want you to know how impressed I am by your dedication to your education. I know it hasn't been easy juggling work and school, but you've persevered, and I'm glad you've been able to use the college fund I set up for you wisely." The room went so quiet I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My heart started pounding. "College fund." My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Grandfather, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a college fund." The color drained from my mother's face. She made a choking sound and her wine glass tumbled from her hand, shattering against the floor. Red wine spread across the white marble like blood at a crime scene. "Oh my God!" she gasped, her voice high and panicked. She immediately turned to one of the servers. "You clumsy idiot! Look what you made me do!" But the server hadn't been anywhere near her. My father started coughing violently, grabbing his napkin and pressing it to his mouth. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the fabric. Dylan's eyes were huge, darting between our grandfather and our parents. Little Leo, oblivious to the tension, piped up in his innocent child's voice. "What do you mean Anya doesn't know? That's her college money," Mommy said. "It's been paying for her school." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My grandfather's face transformed. The warmth drained away, replaced by something cold and terrible. He slowly turned his gaze to my parents, and I saw my father actually flinch. "Victoria, Marcus." His voice was deadly quiet, but it carried more weight than if he had shouted. "What did you do with Anya's fund?" My mother scrambled to her feet, her designer heels crunching on broken glass. "Father Elias, I can explain. There were investments that went bad. The market crashed and we had to pull from certain accounts to cover losses. We were going to replace it, we just needed time." "Bullshit!" The word came from my grandfather with such force that everyone jumped. I had never heard him curse before. "I set up that fund with specific protections. It was in a trust managed by the bank. The only way to access it was with both my signature and Anya's, or with documented proof of educational expenses. How did you get into it?" My mother's face crumpled. She looked at my father desperately, but he was staring at his plate like he wished he could disappear into it. "We needed the money," Victoria said, her voice taking on a whining quality. "Dylan's tuition was so expensive and the house needed repairs and we had debts." "So you stole from your own daughter." My grandfather's words were like hammer blows. "You forged documents. You lied to me for 3 years, and you let Anya work herself to death thinking she had to pay her own way when the entire time there was money set aside specifically for her education." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. The way my mother had dismissed my request for help. The way they had both avoided talking about my college plans. The way they had kept me at arm's length, probably terrified that someone would let the truth slip. "How much?" I heard myself ask. My voice sounded strange, distant. "How much was in the fund?" My grandfather turned to me, and I saw pain in his eyes. $80,000. Enough for 4 years at a good university with room and board covered. $80,000. I had spent 3 years working myself into exhaustion for $80,000 that should have been mine all along. I thought about all the times I had eaten ramen for every meal because I couldn't afford anything else. The times I had walked miles in the rain because I couldn't afford bus fare. The times I had studied by flashlight in my car because I couldn't afford to keep the electricity on in my apartment. All of that suffering, all of that struggle while my mother wore Prada and my father drove a Lexus and my brother partied at his expensive university. I stood up so abruptly my chair fell backward. Every eye in the room turned to me. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and I saw what she was. A parasite, a manipulator, someone who would rob her own child without a second thought. And my father, weak and complicit, had let it happen. "You lived off my future." My voice was shaking but clear. "You bought your clothes and your cars and your lifestyle with money that was supposed to give me a chance at a better life. And you didn't care. You never cared." Victoria's expression hardened. The fake tears dried up instantly, replaced by the cold mask I knew so well. "Don't you dare speak to me that way. We're your parents. We've provided for you your entire life. You have no idea what it takes to maintain appearances in our social circle. Sacrifices had to be made." Sacrifices. I laughed, and it sounded unhinged even to my own ears. I was the sacrifice. I've always been the sacrifice. Well, I'm done. I turned to my grandfather. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Thank you for trying to help me, even though I never got to use it, but I can't stay here anymore." My grandmother reached out toward me, tears streaming down her face. "Anya, please." But I was already walking away. I heard my grandfather's voice behind me, sharp and commanding. "Anya, wait. Please don't leave like this. We need to fix this." I paused at the doorway, turned back. "There's nothing to fix. They stole from me. They lied to you. And they destroyed any chance I had at a normal college experience. The only thing that needs to happen now is they need to face what they've done." My mother's voice rose to a shriek. "You ungrateful little bitch, after everything we've done for you!" "You've done nothing for me." The words tore out of my throat. "Nothing. You made me feel worthless my entire life. You treated me like a servant. You stole my future, and now you're going to pay for it." I walked out of that dining room through the marble foyer and out into the cold November night. Behind me, I could hear my grandfather shouting, my grandmother crying, my mother still screeching something venomous. But I kept walking. The gates opened automatically from the inside, and I stepped through them into the darkness beyond. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do next. But as I walked down that dark road, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Pure, burning rage. And beneath it, a cold determination. They had stolen from me. They had broken me down. But I was still standing, and now I was going to make sure they faced consequences. The next morning, I woke up in my cramped bedroom with a clarity I had never experienced before. While my roommates shuffled around getting ready for their days, I sat on my mattress on the floor and made a list. First, I needed to understand exactly what had happened with the fund. Second, I needed proof. Third, I needed help from someone who understood the law. My phone buzzed with texts from my grandmother pleading messages asking me to come back so we could talk. There was one from my grandfather, too. "Anya, I am looking into this matter. Please don't do anything rash. We will make this right." But I didn't trust that anymore. My grandfather was a good man, but he was old, and these were his family members. Blood was thick, and I had learned the hard way that being related to someone didn't mean they had your back. If I wanted justice, I would have to get it myself. I thought about Jake Miller. We had been close friends in high school, the kind of friendship where you shared your dreams and fears over cheap fast food and long walks. He had understood what it was like to struggle because his family hadn't had much either. We had lost touch after graduation, both of us consumed by our own survival. But I knew he had gotten a full ride to State University and was now finishing up law school. I found him on social media and sent him a message keeping it simple. "Jake, it's Anya. I need legal advice. It's urgent. Can we meet?" He responded within an hour. "Anya, of course. Are you okay? Want to meet at Morrison's Diner tomorrow?" Morrison's Diner was the same place we used to hang out as teenagers, a greasy spoon that served breakfast all day and didn't judge if you nursed a single cup of coffee for 3 hours. I agreed immediately. That night at work, I could barely concentrate. I kept replaying the Thanksgiving dinner in my head, the look on my mother's face when she realized the truth was coming out the way my father had just sat there like a coward, my grandfather's rage. When I met Jake the next day, he was already in a booth by the window. He had filled out since high school, grown into his height, and he looked professional in dark jeans and a button-down shirt. But his smile was the same warm and genuine. He stood up and pulled me into a hug that I didn't realize I desperately needed. "You look exhausted," he said gently as we sat down. "What's going on?" I told him everything. The whole sordid story spilled out of me. The years of being treated like I didn't matter. The struggle to pay for community college. The Thanksgiving revelation. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he sat back and let out a long breath. "Anya, this is fraud. What they did forging documents to access a trust fund that wasn't theirs, that's serious. It's criminal." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You could press charges. You could sue them for the money." "Would I win?" I asked. "If the evidence is there, yes. Absolutely." He pulled out a small notebook and started making notes. "We need to get copies of the original trust documents. We need bank records showing where the money went. We need to establish a timeline of when the funds were accessed and what they were used for. Your grandfather can help with some of this, but we might also need to subpoena records from the bank." My head was spinning. "Jake, I don't have money for a lawyer." He looked up at me and his expression was fierce. "I'm not charging you. This is wrong, Anya. What they did to you is beyond wrong. I'll help you pro bono, and if we recover the funds, which I think we will, there will be enough to pay any legal fees from that. But honestly, I would do this for free. You deserve justice." I felt tears welling up and fought them back. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me help. Say you won't let them get away with this." He reached across the table and took my hand. "You were always too nice, Anya. Too forgiving. But some things can't be forgiven. And this is one of them." Over the next 2 weeks, Jake helped me start building a case. He requested documents from my grandfather, who complied immediately and seemed almost relieved that someone was taking action. The trust documents showed clearly that the fund had been established when I was born, with strict terms that only allowed withdrawals for verified educational expenses. My grandfather had put in $50,000 initially, and it had grown to $80,000 over the years through conservative investments. The bank records told a devastating story. Starting 3 years ago, right around the time I graduated high school, there had been systematic withdrawals. They were disguised as tuition payments, but they didn't match up with any school I had attended. Jake traced where the money had actually gone. $10,000 had gone to pay off credit card debt in my mother's name. $15,000 had been used as a down payment on my father's Lexus. $20,000 had funded a renovation on their house. $5,000 had paid for a vacation to the Bahamas. The rest had been spread across various luxury purchases and bills. Not a single cent had gone toward my education. They had forged my signature on withdrawal forms. They had created fake invoices from a community college I didn't attend. They had lied to the bank, to my grandfather, and to me. It was systematic, calculated fraud. But Jake said we needed more. Your grandfather's testimony and these documents are powerful, but if we really want to make sure they can't worm their way out of this, we need to document their lifestyle. We need to show that they were living beyond their means and using your money to fund it. That's when I thought of hiring a private investigator. The idea seemed crazy at first. I had barely any money in my savings account. But Jake knew someone, a woman named Sarah Reed, who had a reputation for being thorough and not overcharging clients who genuinely needed help. I met Sarah at her small office above a dry cleaner in the strip mall near campus. She was in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to my story while taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "Your parents sound like real pieces of work," she said when I finished. "I'll be honest with you, Anya. This kind of investigation can get expensive, but I believe in what you're doing. I'll charge you my basic rate and we'll work out a payment plan, and if you win your lawsuit, you can pay me then. Deal." I nodded, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers who seemed to care more about me than my own parents ever had. Sarah got to work immediately. She followed my parents, documenting their spending habits. She photographed my mother at luxury boutiques getting spa treatments that cost hundreds of dollars, having lunch at country clubs. She tracked my father to a private golf course where membership alone cost thousands a year. She compiled receipts, credit card statements, and a detailed timeline of their spending that corresponded exactly with the withdrawals from my trust fund. But Sarah found something else, too. Something that made my stomach turn when she showed me the photographs. My mother had bought a condo in downtown, a small luxury unit that she was keeping secret from my father. She had registered it under her maiden name. Sarah had traced several large withdrawals from joint accounts that had gone toward this purchase. My mother was apparently preparing an exit strategy, building a nest egg separate from my father, and she was using stolen money to do it. "Your mother is planning to leave your father," Sarah said, tapping the photos spread across her desk. "She's been moving money around, setting herself up. I'd bet anything she's been having an affair too, but I haven't caught her with anyone yet. Point is, she's been systematically robbing both you and her own husband to build herself an escape hatch." I felt sick. Not because I cared about my parents' marriage, they had made their choices, but because of the sheer calculation of it all. My mother hadn't just stolen from me in a moment of weakness or desperation. She had planned it. She had used my future to build her own. While all this was happening, I tried to avoid my family, but that proved impossible. My grandmother called me multiple times a day, leaving tearful voicemails. My grandfather sent formal messages through his lawyer informing me that he was conducting his own investigation and that there would be consequences for my parents. Dylan showed up at my apartment one evening looking uncomfortable. I answered the door in my work clothes, smelling like coffee and grease. Dylan stood there in his expensive coat, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't want to let him in, but curiosity won out. I stepped aside and he entered my tiny, shabby apartment. I watched his eyes take in the peeling paint, the furniture from thrift stores, the hot plate I used as a stove because the actual stove didn't work. His face showed something I hadn't seen before, shame, maybe, or recognition of how differently we had lived. "What do you want, Dylan?" I asked, crossing my arms. "I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving, about what happened." He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I know Mom and Dad messed up, but don't you think pressing charges is going too far? I mean, they're still our parents. This will destroy the family." I laughed a harsh sound. "The family? What family, Dylan? The one where I worked 3 jobs while you went to private school. The one where I slept in my car while you partied at frat houses. They destroyed any chance of us being a real family a long time ago." But think about what this will do to them. Mom could go to jail. Dad could lose everything. And for what? Money that you're doing fine without anyway. His words hit me like a physical blow. You think I'm doing fine? You think any of this is fine? I gestured around my apartment. I've been eating 1 meal a day for 2 years because I can't afford food. I've been wearing the same clothes until they fall apart. I've been so exhausted I've literally fallen asleep standing up. And all that time there was money that was supposed to be mine. Money that could have changed my entire life. But Mom and Dad stole it to maintain their lifestyle, to fund your lifestyle. Dylan's face went red. I didn't know. I swear, Anya, I didn't know. But you never asked, did you? You never wondered why I wasn't at university with you. You never questioned why I looked like hell every time you saw me while you were wearing clothes that cost more than my rent. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. He opened his mouth, closed it. You're right, he finally said quietly. I should have paid attention. I should have asked questions. But I'm asking you now, please don't destroy everything. There has to be another way. There isn't, I said firmly. They had a choice. They could have been honest. They could have asked grandfather for help. They could have cut back on their spending. Instead, they chose to rob me. And now they have to face the consequences. This isn't about revenge, Dylan. It's about justice. He left without another word. I watched him drive away in his nice car, and I felt nothing. My brother was just as much a product of my parents' selfishness as I was a victim of it. He had been raised to believe he deserved everything handed to him and that I deserved nothing. It was too late to change that now. As December approached, I continued working with Jake and Sarah to build an airtight case. We had everything we needed. Bank records forged signatures, photographic evidence of their luxury spending testimonies from my grandfather and grandmother. Jake filed a civil lawsuit against my parents for fraud and theft. He also filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. The day the papers were served, I was at work. I didn't see it happen, but Jake texted me. It's done. They've been served. No going back now. My hands shook as I made lattes for customers who had no idea that my entire world was about to explode. Part of me felt powerful. I was fighting back. I was standing up for myself. But another part felt terrified. What if this all backfired? What if somehow they found a way to turn this around on me? What if I ended up alone and with nothing? That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my mother. Her voice was shaking with rage. How dare you? How dare you sue your own parents? Do you have any idea what you've done? The humiliation everyone knows now. Everyone is talking about it. You've destroyed us. You destroyed yourselves, I said calmly. I'm just making sure you face consequences for it. You vindictive little bitch. After everything we've done for you. We raised you, clothed you, fed you, and this is how you repay us. You stole $80,000 from me. You forged my signature. You committed fraud. Everything else you're describing was your legal obligation as parents. You don't get credit for basic requirements. She started screaming, then a stream of abuse and accusations. I held the phone away from my ear until she ran out of steam. Then I said very clearly, don't contact me again unless it's through your lawyer. And I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt strong. I had drawn a line. I had set a boundary, and I wasn't going to let them cross it ever again. The lawsuit became the talk of my grandparents' social circle. I heard through my grandmother that my mother was being shunned at her club, that people were whispering behind her back. My father had apparently locked himself in his home office and refused to come out. Dylan was fielding uncomfortable questions from his friends. The Thorne family scandal was in full bloom, but my grandfather stood by me. He called me himself, his voice firm and reassuring. Anya, I want you to know that I support what you're doing. What they did was unconscionable, and I'm going to make sure they never have the opportunity to hurt anyone like this again. Thank you, grandfather, I whispered into the phone. I'm having Christmas dinner at the estate in a few weeks. I want you to come. I need you to come. It's time for this family to face some truths. I hesitated. The thought of walking back into that house made my stomach churn. But my grandfather's voice was insistent. Please, Anya. I know I'm asking a lot, but this needs to happen. I'll make sure you're protected. I'll make sure you're heard. Finally, I agreed. Christmas dinner at the Thorne estate. One last confrontation. One final chance to expose everything and bring it all into the light. The days leading up to Christmas were surreal. I went through the motions of work and school, but my mind was elsewhere. Sarah gave me regular updates. My parents had hired an expensive lawyer who was trying to claim the money had been a gift, not a theft, that my grandfather had actually approved the withdrawals. But that fell apart quickly when my grandfather's lawyer produced time-stamped emails and bank notifications showing that my grandfather had been kept in the dark about every withdrawal. Jake was confident. They don't have a leg to stand on. Their lawyer knows it too. They're going to try to settle, but I think we should push for full restitution plus damages. What they did deserves more than just paying back what they took. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I borrowed a better outfit this time from a coworker, a simple black pantsuit that made me look professional and put together. I did my hair carefully. I even put on a little makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone different from the exhausted, defeated girl who had walked out of that mansion on Thanksgiving. I saw someone who knew her worth, someone who was fighting back. I took a rideshare to the estate this time. I wasn't going to arrive on foot like a beggar. When the car pulled up to the gates, they opened immediately. Someone had been expecting me. The house was decorated for Christmas lights twinkling in every window wreaths on the doors. It looked magical and cold all at once. My grandmother met me at the door. She looked older than I remembered, the stress of the past month etched in new lines on her face. But she smiled when she saw me and pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, my dear girl, I'm so proud of you. So proud." Inside the house was warm and smelled of pine and cinnamon, but the atmosphere was anything but festive. I could feel the tension crackling in the air. My grandmother led me to the dining room where everyone was gathering. My grandfather stood at the head of the table looking like a judge about to pass sentence. My mother and father were already seated, both looking haggard and angry. My mother's usual perfect appearance was marred by dark circles under her eyes and a tightness around her mouth. My father wouldn't look at anyone, his attention fixed on the empty plate in front of him. Dylan was there too, sitting as far from our parents as possible. He gave me a small nod when I entered, something almost like respect in his eyes. Little Leo was blessedly absent, his parents having decided this dinner was not appropriate for children. The table was set beautifully as always, but no one was touching the food. I took my seat at my grandfather's right hand, a position of honor that wasn't lost on anyone. My mother's eyes blazed when she saw where I was sitting. My father finally looked up, and I saw something broken in his expression. Good. Let him feel broken. I had been broken for years. My grandfather cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is difficult for everyone, but it's necessary." He looked around the table, his gaze stern. "This family has been living with lies and deception for too long, and tonight we're going to address that." My mother started to speak, but my grandfather held up his hand. "Victoria, you will have your chance to speak, but first I want to lay out the facts as I understand them. 3 years ago, I established a trust fund for Anya's education. This fund was protected, requiring specific authorization for any withdrawals. Despite these protections, money was systematically stolen from this account through forged documents and false claims." He pulled out a folder and opened it, revealing documents I recognized from Jake's investigation. The money was used for personal expenses, luxury items, vacations. None of it went toward Anya's education as intended. Meanwhile, Anya herself worked multiple jobs and lived in poverty, believing she had to support herself entirely. My mother's face was bright red. "We were going to pay it back. We just needed time." 3 years, my grandfather said coldly. "You had 3 years to come clean, 3 years to ask for help legitimately. Instead, you continued to spend money that wasn't yours while your daughter struggled." My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Father, we made mistakes, bad mistakes, but we're still family. Doesn't that count for something?" "Family should count for something," I said, speaking for the first time. Everyone's attention snapped to me. "But you never treated me like family. You treated me like I was nothing, like I didn't matter. You spent my future on designer purses and car payments in a secret condo." My mother's eyes widened. She hadn't known that I knew about the condo. How did I find out?" I finished for her. "I hired a private investigator. I built a case. I gathered evidence. Everything you've done is documented, and it's all going to come out in court. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own folder, the one Sarah had prepared. I spread the contents across the table. Bank statements, photographs of my mother shopping at Prada, pictures of my father at his golf club, receipts for spa treatments and fine dining, the deed to the secret condo, all of it laid bare. This is where my education went, I said, my voice steady. This is what you valued more than my future. My grandmother had her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. My grandfather's expression was like stone. Dylan stared at the evidence with wide eyes. But my parents, they looked at me with pure hatred. Not regret, not guilt. Hatred. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" my mother hissed. "Playing the victim, making us look like monsters. You've always been jealous of what we have." "What you have? You don't have anything. It's all stolen. All of it." I looked at my father. "And you just let it happen. You were too weak to stop her, too selfish to care about what it was doing to me." My father's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Anya, I'm so sorry. I know I failed you. I know I should have been stronger." "Sorry isn't enough," I said. "Sorry doesn't give me back 3 years of my life. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep because I didn't think I mattered to anyone." My grandfather stood up, commanding immediate silence. "Marcus, Victoria, I've made some decisions. First, you are both being removed from any inheritance from this estate. Second, I'm cutting off all financial support effective immediately. Third, I'm backing Anya's lawsuit 100%. You will face the legal consequences of your actions." My mother shot to her feet. "You can't do this. This is our family, our legacy. You destroyed that legacy the moment you decided to steal from your own daughter," my grandfather said. "And there's one more thing. Dylan." My brother jerked upright. "Yes, sir. I've reviewed your college expenses. I want to know how much you knew about where the money was coming from." Dylan's face went white. "I didn't know, grandfather, I swear. I thought you were paying for my school like you always said you would." "And you never questioned why Anya wasn't receiving the same support?" Dylan hesitated. "I should have. I know I should have. I'm ashamed that I didn't. But I promise I had no idea they were stealing from her fund." My grandfather studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, but you will make this right. You will help your sister however she needs. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Dylan said immediately. He turned to me. "Anya, I'll do whatever I can. I'll testify. I'll help with legal costs, whatever you need." I looked at my brother, this person I had grown up with but never really known. He looked sincere, but I had been fooled by my family before. "We'll see," I said non-committally. The dinner dissolved after that. My mother stormed out screaming threats about her own lawyers and how we would all pay for this betrayal. My father followed her, his shoulders slumped in defeat. My grandmother cried. My grandfather put his arm around her and murmured words of comfort. Dylan lingered by the door, looking like he wanted to say something more but didn't know how. I sat in that dining room surrounded by the ruins of a family that had never really existed in the first place, and I felt free. Not happy, not yet, but free. The weight of pretending, of hoping they would change, of trying to earn love that would never be given that weight was gone. My grandfather sat back down beside me. "Are you all right, Anya?" "I am," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "I really am." "This will get uglier before it gets better," he warned. "They will fight. They will say terrible things." "Let them," I said. "I have the truth on my side, and I have you. That's more than I've ever had before." He smiled a rare, genuine smile. "Yes, you have me, and I'm not going anywhere." The lawsuit moved forward quickly after Christmas. My parents tried every tactic their lawyer could think of. They claimed I was lying about not knowing about the fund. They said I had given them permission to use the money. They accused my grandfather of manipulating me. Every claim was easily disproven with evidence and testimony. The local media picked up the story. Wealthy couple accused of stealing from daughter's college fund. It became a minor scandal in certain circles. My mother's society friends abandoned her. My father's business associates started distancing themselves. The weight of public opinion crashed down on them with the force of a tsunami. Meanwhile, I kept going to my classes and working my shifts. But something had changed in me. I walked taller. I spoke up in class. I stopped apologizing for existing. People noticed. My coworkers commented that I seemed different, stronger. My professors told me my work had improved. One even asked if I wanted to present my research paper at a student conference. Jake kept me updated on the legal proceedings. They're going to try to settle. Their lawyer knows they'll lose if this goes to trial. The evidence is too strong and public sentiment is completely on your side. You're looking at full restitution plus punitive damages, probably close to $150,000 when it's all said and done. I could barely comprehend that number. $150,000, enough to finish my degree at a real university, enough to move into a decent apartment, enough to breathe. There's something else, Jake added. The district attorney is moving forward with criminal charges. Your mother might actually face jail time for the fraud. Your father will probably get probation since he's cooperating and showing remorse. The thought of my mother in jail should have given me satisfaction. Instead, I just felt tired. I don't want to destroy them, I said. I just want them to acknowledge what they did, to face consequences, to understand that they can't treat people this way. They're facing consequences, Jake assured me. They've lost their reputation. They're losing their money. They've lost their daughter. Those are consequences that will follow them forever. The settlement came through in March. My parents agreed to pay back the full $80,000 from the trust fund plus $70,000 in punitive damages and legal fees. They had to liquidate assets to do it, selling my mother's secret condo, my father's Lexus, and dipping into retirement accounts. It devastated them financially. My mother took a plea deal on the criminal charges, avoiding jail, but receiving a suspended sentence and having to perform community service. My father's sentence was similar. They were essentially bankrupted and publicly humiliated. When the check arrived, I stared at it for a long time. $150,000. It seemed both enormous and inadequate. No amount of money could give me back those years of struggle, but it could give me a future. I paid Sarah and Jake, making sure they were compensated fairly for their work. Then I did something I had been dreaming about for years. I applied to the state university for the fall semester. Not community college. The actual 4-year university with the social work program I had always wanted. And this time, when they asked how I would pay for it, I had an answer. I also moved out of my terrible apartment. I found a small one-bedroom place near campus. Nothing fancy, but it had heat that actually worked and a kitchen with functional appliances. My first night there, I cooked myself a real meal on my actual stove and ate it at my own table, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. From the sheer, overwhelming sensation of being okay. My relationship with my family changed permanently. I maintained contact with my grandparents, especially my grandfather, who called me regularly to check in. My grandmother sent me care packages and always remembered my birthday. Dylan and I started having coffee occasionally. He was genuinely trying to make amends, using his own money to help with things I needed, introducing me to people in his network who could help with job opportunities. He wasn't a perfect brother, but he was trying. That was more than I expected. My parents, I cut off completely. They made a few attempts to reach out, letters that mixed apologies with blame, voicemails that sounded rehearsed and insincere. I blocked their numbers. I returned their letters unopened. I had given them chance after chance my entire life. I had no more chances to give. By the time summer arrived, I was enrolled in university, working a reasonable part-time job instead of 3 jobs, and living in a place that felt like a home. I started therapy using my new student health insurance to talk through the damage my childhood had done. My therapist helped me understand that the way my parents had treated me wasn't my fault, that I hadn't failed to earn their love, they had failed to give it. That understanding changed everything. In August, I attended freshman orientation at the university, even though I was technically a junior transfer student. I wanted the full experience, everything I had been denied before. I made friends, I joined clubs, I went to football games and parties. I lived the college life I had watched others have while I was working myself to death. And it was wonderful. Not perfect, nothing ever is but wonderful. One evening in September, I got a message from Dylan. Mom and Dad are selling the house. They're moving into an apartment. Thought you should know. I looked at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Okay, thanks for telling me." And that was all I felt. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just neutral acknowledgement. They were reaping what they had sown. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. As my first semester progressed, I threw myself into my studies. Social work was everything I had hoped it would be. I learned about family systems trauma advocacy. I learned about helping people who were in situations like the one I had escaped from. It gave purpose to my pain. Maybe everything I had gone through wasn't wasted. Maybe it had prepared me to help others. One day in my family dynamics class, the professor asked if anyone had personal experience with family dysfunction. Before I could second-guess myself, my hand went up, and I told my story. Not all the details, but enough. The class was silent when I finished. Then the professor said, "Thank you for sharing that, Anya. That kind of first-hand experience is invaluable in this field. You're going to make an excellent social worker." I felt something click into place. This was why I had survived. This was the point. I was going to take all that pain and turn it into something that could help others. I was going to make sure other kids didn't feel as invisible and worthless as I had felt. By December, I was preparing for my final exams and planning what I would do during winter break. My grandfather invited me to Christmas dinner again, just the family that wanted to be there, meaning him, my grandmother Dylan, and a few cousins. No Victoria, no Marcus. They were conspicuously absent from all family functions, now essentially exiled by my grandfather's decree. On Christmas Eve, I drove to the estate in my own car, this time a used Honda I had bought with part of the settlement money. It wasn't fancy, but it ran well, and it was mine. I arrived to find the house decorated beautifully again, but this time the atmosphere was genuinely warm. My grandmother hugged me tightly. My grandfather kissed my forehead. Dylan helped me out of my coat. We had dinner, a small group, but a real one, and people actually talked to me, asked about my life, listened to my answers. After dinner, my grandfather asked me to come to his study. It was a room I had never been in before, filled with law books and dark wood furniture. He poured us each a small glass of brandy and gestured for me to sit. "I wanted to talk to you privately," he said. "I want to make sure that what happened with the first trust fund never happens again. I've established a new fund for you larger than the original, and this one has ironclad protections. No one can access it but you." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Grandfather, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. You're graduating in 2 years. You'll want to go to graduate school for your social work degree. This will cover that and more. Consider it an investment in the extraordinary woman you're becoming." I set down my glass because my hands were shaking. "I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by living the life you were always meant to live. Thank me by being happy. Thank me by never letting anyone make you feel small again." He raised his glass. "To Anya Petrova, who taught this old man that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand up for yourself." We clinked glasses, and I felt something settle in my chest. Peace, maybe. Or maybe just the knowledge that I was finally exactly where I was supposed to be. The next 2 years passed in a blur of classes, internships, and personal growth. I graduated with honors, got accepted into an excellent graduate program, and started dating a fellow social work student who treated me with kindness and respect. I built a life that was mine, earned through my own hard work, and supported by people who genuinely cared about me. I heard through Dylan that my parents had separated. My mother moved to another state, apparently trying to rebuild her social status in a place where people didn't know about the scandal. My father stayed local, working a modest job and living quietly. Dylan said he seemed broken-aged decades in just a few years. Sometimes Dylan visited him trying to maintain some kind of relationship. I didn't begrudge him that. Everyone had to make their own choices about forgiveness and family. For me, the choice was clear. I had forgiven them in the sense that I no longer carried active anger. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't mean letting them back into my life. They had shown me who they were repeatedly over years. I believed them, and I chose to protect myself from them. Now, as I stand here 3 years after that explosive Thanksgiving dinner, I can honestly say I'm happy. Not in spite of what I went through, but because of how I chose to respond to it. I chose to fight back. I chose to demand justice. I chose to believe that I deserved better. And that choice changed everything. I work now at a nonprofit that helps young adults aging out of foster care, helping them navigate the transition to independence. I see myself in every kid who doesn't believe they matter, every teenager who thinks they have to accept whatever scraps they're given, and I tell them what I wish someone had told me sooner. You deserve better. You don't have to accept mistreatment from anyone, not even family, especially not family. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who supports you, who treats you with respect and love. My real family now includes my grandparents, who proved that love means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It includes Jake, who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. It includes Sarah, who helped me find the truth. It includes Dylan, who is learning to be better. And it includes the people I've chosen, friends and mentors and colleagues who see my value. The girl who walked into that Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago, exhausted and invisible, barely surviving, she wouldn't recognize me now. That girl was convinced she didn't matter. But I know better now. I matter. My feelings matter. My future matters. And anyone who tries to convince me otherwise doesn't deserve a place in my life. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. If you're in a situation where someone is making you feel worthless, whether it's family, a partner, a friend, whoever you need to know something, their treatment of you says everything about them and nothing about you. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to demand respect. And you have the right to walk away from anyone who refuses to give it to you, no matter who they are. It won't be easy. It wasn't easy for me. There were moments I doubted myself, moments I felt guilty, moments I wanted to give up. But I'm so glad I didn't, because on the other side of that pain is freedom. On the other side of that confrontation is peace. On the other side of standing up for yourself is a life that's actually worth living. Family is supposed to be your foundation, your support system, the people who love you unconditionally. But what happens when family becomes the source of your pain? What happens when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones hurting you? You have to become your own foundation. You have to build your own support system. You have to learn to love yourself unconditionally because you can't rely on them to do it. And here's the truth. Nobody tells you. Sometimes you have to lose your family to find yourself. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can perform is self-love, even when it costs you relationships you thought you needed. I lost my parents. But I found myself, and that trade was worth it. So I'm asking you, now, have you ever had to stand up to family? Have you ever had to choose yourself over people who were supposed to choose you first? Drop a comment and share your story. You might help someone else who's struggling with the same decision, and if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own boundaries and your own worth, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. I share stories like this to remind people that they're not alone, that their struggles matter, and that there's always hope on the other side of standing up for yourself. Your support helps me reach more people who need to hear this message. Remember, you deserve better. You always have. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.